Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but I do like a good book from time to time. I'm I'm very subtle about it. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the video. Today, it's time to go over my 2022 reading log. Now, just to kind of give some context for this, I've done this in years past, and I've always wanted a really good rating scale for how I talk about books, and I think I've got it whittled down pretty okay. 5 basic categories. Nonfiction is going to be a separate, its own category. It is a 5-point scale, but everything from 2 points and up is good. All right, the only bad score is a 1. I didn't give anything a bad score this year. Tier 1, number 1, that is trash, right? And it's going to be very, very rare for me to give that out because in general, I won't finish the book if I think this is where it belongs. And I don't think it's fair to review a book if I didn't finish it. So this list is only books I finished. Number 2, entertainment. From the start, it's good, you'll enjoy it. If you like the genre, if you like the pitch, go check it out. You might enjoy it. You probably will. I did. Right? Number 3, art. You will be, in some way, improved, I think, as a person for having read this book and engaged with the ideas. Doesn't mean all the ideas are worth agreeing with, but that they are all worth engaging with, if that distinction makes sense to people. From art up, it's not even about quality anymore, it's about importance. All right, so tier 4, definitive. This is a work that either defined its genre, or that, in my opinion, hopefully, will define the genre going forward, right? If it's too new of a book to really have defined the genre yet, like, absolutely, obviously, Lord of the Rings, definitive, right? If you say you're a fantasy fan, you should have read Lord of the Rings, right? Does that make sense? Foundation, definitive, right? I don't even think it's Asimov's best work, but it's his most definitive work. It's the one that really influenced science fiction the most. And if you're going to say you're a science fiction fan, then I think you should have read Foundation, right? A handful of books. I'm going to be honest here. I am a huge fan of Becky Chambers' work, and it's mostly because of her that I make this distinction. Some of these are books that I just think do something that should define the genre moving forward. And I don't want to discount them of that just because of they're not old enough yet to have defined the genre yet. Does that make sense? Cool. Number 5, canon. Books that I think belong in the literary canon. This is going to be a very rare one to give away. This year, I found the second book that I would consider worth including in the literary canon. All right? Second. At all. I do want to say, too, I finished my Bible in a year. This year, I don't usually actually finish in a year. I just do a little bit of reading every day, and when I finish, I finish. I'm not counting religious books in this because, I would put the Bible as canon. And, well, I don't even know if I could put it in that category. I'd put it in the nonfiction category, honestly. And that would spark a debate that's not helpful or useful or accomplishing anything whatsoever. So, religious texts are off the table. If it is the core religious text of a religion, it's not going on the scale at all. Fair enough, understood, cool, let's get into the list. A self-help book for people who trust their neighbors a little too much. So glad prisons and Russia have turned things around since this cautionary tale came out. It would really be awful if everything this book talks about was just as bad as it's ever been. I'm starting to think Brother Cadfael is a matchmaker who only occasionally solves crimes. I'm not complaining, but I'm starting to get the feeling. Bro, we should start a podcast. Hey, look, everything my history classes should have taught me. I think this book is exactly what it intended to be. It might just be that self-help parody isn't for me. But I can see the care and attention that went into it, and I hope you enjoy it if you like it. Oh, that's where the Skeleton Sword Santa comic comes from. Turns out being a detective is about surviving attempts on your life long enough to learn something from them. Human progress isn't linear, but neither is time, space, causality. Basically, nothing is linear, and a novel still managed to come out of that. I love Vonnegut. I have a bad habit of picking up a series partway through, and this one might be my worst case yet. I had no idea this was a Three Musketeers story until I was already reading it. Also, when the movie came out and I knew that Leonardo DiCaprio was in it, I assumed it was just like a romance for the longest time, like years. Redwall only needed two things to become the perfect series: a strong female protagonist and pirates. This is kind of a detective story, but the detective solves every whodunit that crops up in about a chapter and spends most of the series starting a gang war out of spite. I don't even know what genre this is, but I love it. Man, between this and Mountains of Madness, we just really had no idea what was going on anywhere there was snow, huh? I'll say this wasn't my favorite Discworld novel, but this could arguably be the most culturally important Discworld novel. Really teaches a just evergreen applicable lesson about human nature. I read this while on my way to vacation and just had to sit there on a flight, not being okay afterwards. I read this one while flying back from vacation and just had to sit there on a flight, not being okay afterwards. Okay, I know the after that things get difficult meme with the talking kangaroo. I know that one can't be a Discworld meme too. But like after this book, maybe? Like maybe, though. Spoiler warning. Spoiler warning. Spoiler warning. My favorite was the short story about the woman who decided to turn a dinner party into a writer's room workshop to try out her murder concept. What if the Dungeon Master's Guide and The Good Place had a baby? I don't know, man. I read this, but then I fell off making anything for 2 months. Maybe it was seasonal affective, whatever SAD stands for. Maybe this book just didn't work for me, and it could work for literally everyone else who read it. I just didn't get creative work done nearly as well after reading it as before. Not saying that's the book or the author's fault. That might just be a me thing. Yeah, so I disappeared without notice to go look for livestock and almost ended the world, but hey, I've learned my lesson. That's why, right at the end of the book, I disappeared without notice to go look for livestock. Yes, he's a drunken grifter who abuses his power as a lawman and is essentially the worst kind of cop, but he's really, really good to dogs. Please love him. I didn't know there was more Screwtape content that I hadn't read before, and finding that just right in the middle of a batch of theological, philosophical essays really just threw me for a loop. This is the first character I've read who feels like they could say the line, "I don't do friends." And they've earned it after what happens in this book. They've earned that. They're like the only one who can say that and not sound like an edgy teenager. Alright, second time this year that I accidentally started a series partway through because I didn't know the name of the first book. But you know what? I did enjoy it. Would you like Star Trek, but with more Age of Sail naval discipline described in excruciating detail? Have I got a series for you? This guy solves ordinary problems with manipulation and hijinks and weird hiring actors and putting together elaborate scenarios to just make couples fall in love again or whatever. This is the most anime plot I've ever seen in an Agatha Christie book. And just like every other time I've read a book in the Witches series, I want to play a D&D game as Granny Weatherwax again. I keep doing this to myself. This feels like there was a bet to use every individual part of the Resident Evil franchise and make a story that's nothing whatsoever like Resident Evil. And that's everything. I didn't quite read so many books this year, but I did read a few longer ones, so I think that's where it all kind of balanced out. All of that said, it's time for my top 5 for the year. Number 5, The Silk Roads. This, I think, is the highest I've ever put a nonfiction book, and when I said everything I should have learned in history class, I meant it. I was born in 87, I started elementary school in 92, And I guess by that point, people still hadn't worked out, like, hey, we should put everything that happened with Iran and Ayatollah Khomeini in the history books. Like, I should not have been in my mid-30s by the time I learned everything that happened with Iran in the 70s. This was intense. This was a lot. And the thing is, that's not everything the book's about. That's what sticks in my mind the hardest, but it's basically just this survey of world history, starting with these cultural roots of Persia, right? And how Persia was the center of the world, and how so much of Rome's history, they were trying to be Persia and imitate Persia, right? And how much China was interacting with Persia, and how, like, ancient Persia was like the Paris of its day. It was seen as just the place you go for the culture. That's where the culture lives. And seeing England being a footnote until like the 1400s. Like, no one cared what happened in Europe west of about Rome, at least on a world stage. Like, it's just mind-blowing to see this perspective of, no, England has not been center stage in world politics for very long at all. And just that perspective and that emphasis on how religion and economics interacted, this is one of the most fascinating nonfiction books I think I've ever read. Number 4, The Sirens of Titan. First book I read this year that I had to just put down and be like, okay, I'm gonna just not be okay for a little bit after reading this. It was intense. I don't want to spoil anything, so this might be a very quick review because it's so hard to spoil things in this book. Like, all the pieces just fall into place so perfectly. You've got people moving different directions through time, meeting each other, interacting with each other, and all of human history being just completely overhauled. Like, thousands of years of our history being manipulated by outside forces for something that seems so utterly mundane, and yet to these outside forces, it seems like nothing to them to just mess with this backwater if that's what it takes to accomplish what they want, right? And I don't want to say more because I'll spoil things, but read it. If you like things that really just get into your head and make you question the importance of humanity, even. Like, this is one of those you could put up with Lovecraft of the universe beyond humanity doesn't care about humanity and we are not important to it. This is that taken to the logical extreme and seen through the lens of a technological society. And it's fascinating. Treat yourself. Number 3, The Hogfather. Now, my 1 to 5 rating scale, I actually rated this as entertainment and Jingo as art, and I stand by that. I think Jingo is the book that is more going to, like, really radicalize beliefs in a person. It's really going to change the way people see and interact with the world. Hogfather, I just enjoyed reading more, honestly. Death is one of my favorite series. Death and the Witches are great. Those are my 2 favorite Discworld series, and so I had a great year of Discworld reading this year. Read 4 books, and 2 of them were in my favorite series of Discworld. Hogfather was just so good. Basic premise, someone's trying to kill the Hogfather, kind of their version of Father Christmas or Santa Claus in their world. And as this person is disappearing from the world, Death has to step up and fill the role, and he does it badly. And it's hilarious and also so poignant at times. Like, that's what I love about Discworld, and this has that in spades. It's also, I think, one of the most coherent endings to a Death book. I love the Death series. It's not always apparent exactly what played out in the climactic finale. Sometimes it's just like, oh, and then Death did this one thing. And it's like, okay, how did that solve the problem? It did because magic. And that's what it feels like. I'm sure other people have, like, parsed the meaning out of these stories better, but that's how it sometimes feels to me. This one made so much sense in the way it concluded and ended, and I love that. Like, it's the best of the Death series, and the Death series is the best of Discworld, and I loved it. Number 2. I feel a little bit bad here because usually Becky Chambers is top of my list. But this year, she took the number 2 spot, despite this being probably one of her books that hit me the hardest. I read To Be Taught If Fortunate this year, and this one was a lot. Like, it starts off on a premise of human beings biologically altering themselves in order to survive on alien worlds and do this scientific survey. And it turns into just this idea of what is the purpose of exploration? What is the value of scientific inquiry? What value do you place on it, right? And the book very directly puts that question to the reader and says, you will be the one to decide this. How do we value science? How do we value science against the weight of a human life, even if the person was willing to sacrifice themselves? It's amazing. This book, I had to just put it down and stare at the back of an airplane seat and just kind of, okay, I was just here for a minute, just processing everything that had just gone on in having this book come together the way that it did. And my number 1 book for this year, Red Harvest. Okay, I kind of touched on this during the quick overview portion of this. Red Harvest was fascinating to me. I loved the way this book came together because it is essentially about this unnamed protagonist who rolls into town, gets hired to do a job, decides he hates his employer, but he's going to do the job anyway because he's been hired to do it. Then his employer changes his mind and he goes, no, you know what? I'm doing it anyway because I hate you. And seriously, it is just like, a mystery will be introduced, and he will be like, give me a minute. Okay, I see what's going on here. Mystery solved. And then he'll go back to just sparking off this gang war. And then another mystery will crop up. And again, maybe a chapter, and he's got the next mystery solved. It doesn't even feel like a mystery novel. It feels like, if I had to compare it to anything, I guess it's kind of like John Wick. Maybe? Like, it's this guy who's just, like, got the grit to essentially put the entire underworld at each other's throats. And it's so well done. Like, this was a page-turner. And it was my favorite book of the year. So there's my list. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I gave you some books that you're excited to go and read yourself here in the next coming year. Good luck with your own reading goals. I know I'm going to get started on what I've got coming up down the pipe next. And thank you for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.